The challenge is not how do I do AI? The problem is how am I going to leverage AI to increase my competitive advantage? The number of options that are out there, the number of possibilities, the number of things that are going to change everything. That's the problem with AI.
System corrupt. And that's the problem with AI. Cold metal heart, human dreams fly. And that's the problem with AI. Bottom line fries, empathy die.
Welcome to another edition of The Problem with AI. I am John Tanner. With me, as always, is my co-host Scott Sehlhorst. And we're bringing in a special guest today to talk about leadership and strategy problems with AI. So first, Scott, thank you for joining again. And I'd love to know what thing hits the top of your brain when I talk about leadership and strategy problems with AI.
Great to see you again. The thing that jumps up top of mind for me is what is the new class of problems that are introduced as sort of the knock-on effects or the second order effects of AI existing, whether it's internal or external, and how does that change what leaders have to think about? And does it change the way they think about the things that they're currently dealing with?
Well, luckily, we have with us someone who has dealt with leaders across the Fortune 500 space, Fortune 10, when I worked with him before. Brilliant man, systems thinker, the one, the only, the legend. Dennis Stevens is going to take us through some of those challenges that leaders are facing. And it's a completely different landscape when we're thinking of AI technology, the advancement of it right now. Welcome, Dennis. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, John, it's good to see you.
We'll give you an open shot. You heard what Scott had to say. I know there's generally confusion about what is the leadership or strategy concern now with AI. There's confusion around AI all over. It's kind of the problem with it, but would love to just give you an open crack. What do you got to say?
I'm going to start a little bit by taking a crack at how I think about AI and what I think the new space is that we're talking about. We've been doing artificial intelligence projects for decades. Early on in my career, I built an analytical model that looked at marketplaces for buying mid-range computers and local area networks from IBM. IBM was designed to sell to the top 1,000 companies in the world. They weren't designed to sell all these small and intermediate businesses. They needed a way to go sell to 100 million businesses, or a large number of businesses now. But we helped them redefine the problem to find the 10,000 companies that were most likely to buy mid-range systems. We did a large-scale propensity analysis by analyzing the marketplace with data, using predictive analytics, and finding high propensity markets for IBM to sell into. That's an AI problem. It's an artificial intelligence problem space and solution. That was in the late 80s, right? We've been doing things like that with call centers and all kinds of big data type analytics. I think the thing that's critically different today is in the space of what we'd call generative AI that does natural language processing or image processing and translates it into words and produces outputs that are like human level outputs. So I think that the interesting space, the problem with AI today is around the impact of generative AI specifically.
When people say AI now, they're thinking ChatGPT, they're thinking Copilot, they're not thinking machine learning or data lake or governance model stuff or any of the complex things that we've been doing with artificial intelligence for a few decades now. I mean, the concept goes far, far back. But when people say AI now, it's generally, I have a bot that talks like a human and it's telling me cool stuff.
I think what's important in understanding that we've been doing AI for a long time for executives is some of the questions that will come up is, how do I strategically go apply generative AI to my marketplace? And I think it would be similar to other emerging and innovative technologies. How do I apply IoT and how does that affect my strategy? How do I apply the internet and how does that affect my strategy? When the web first came out, the big database engines, there's all kinds of things that we've had these conversations before. So it's not a brand new conversation. The thing that has to get clear for executives is, because it's becoming so ubiquitous and available in every product from every vendor and coming at you from every angle, what are the risks in my organization that I incur because AI is coming at me? What are the governance issues around the data and the information that could get propagated in my organization? What are the costs that I'm going to incur if I start just doing this stuff in the wild and don't understand all the extra licensing and costs that would come with accessing different AIs? The numbers can add up really, really fast to be really, really big numbers. I'm hearing things like AI can't be trusted, so I should wait 2 years until I work some of these kinks out. Now, that may be coming sooner than 2 years, that some of the kinks get worked out. But I think that we don't know how to think about AI. I think if you're an executive trying to replace jobs with AI today, you're not looking at it the right way. How can AI augment a job so a person that's doing that job today can do a better job of it? Artificial intelligence is using technology and pattern matching to provide information for us to make decisions from. We shouldn't be looking a lot at AI to totally automate a lot of processes without thinking. But we know how to do that other stuff too. We've been doing it in call centers for a long time. But that is more in the big data analytics sort of model like that, not in the generative space. So when I separate the conversation out to what is my human AI interaction pattern, based on the way I'm going to depend on AI to inform or make decisions, what's the governance I need to have? And what exposure is AI going to have to my customers or my brand or what risk is it going to introduce? How do I manage that? So looking at sort of that bucket of, as a leader, how am I going to refine how I'm thinking about it and have some language around it to make sure I'm getting some problem solved? What you don't want to do is just listen to your vendor and implement everything they try to sell you, or take every idea that's really, really cool and implement it.
Dennis, you talked about the capabilities that AI enables you to create or improve in a way that wasn't an option before. Like when we were working together with organizations and systems design and leaning into the business architecture stuff, we were trying to identify the capabilities that were most important to your company to become more competitive, to be better as a company. And now taking into account that AI exists in a way where the potential for improving capabilities changes, where the definition of good enough is changing because of the second point, which is competitors now have these tools also. And in some ways, it's an arms race where you now have to worry about your competitors becoming dramatically more competitive. As a leader, I don't know that it's that the stakes are higher. I think the stakes are the same, but the competitors are better prepared to compete. The third thing you hit on, which I think is really fascinating from a leadership point of view, is looking at the decisions we need to make and informing them better, which was something that we've leaned into before. Like we leverage all of the stuff from Hubbard's worldview of investing to be able to make better decisions. There's an economic value to that. But you tapped into something really interesting when you and I were doing AI work in the 80s and for me in the 90s. We were building tools that I think were helping us calculate. And the generative AI stuff today is in some ways helping us think. And we run into the challenges of displacing our thinking versus augmenting our thinking. So now, from a decision-making point of view, where before it was up to leaders to frame the decision and then work with technology and teams to inform the decision and make it, where now the potential for having AI help you frame the decision and not just inform it is an interesting thread to pull. So how do we take AI's ability to augment people or even participate? I've seen a couple articles where people are talking about AI as if it were a collaborator and not helping people to collaborate.
AI as a third brain conversation. So not as a decision maker, not even as like a single augmenter, but as a bringer of context and consequences into a conversation that we're having, because of its ability to get patterns and gather data and make it available. It becomes a very powerful tool when you're building software, because you're trying to go figure out how to build something new, and maybe an AI partner could go find out there's been implemented 3 times before. If you give me the right test cases and the right structures and the right architecture, it can type a lot of code for you. It can maybe analyze your architecture and give you some other patterns that you can solve things with. You probably don't want to turn code generation over to an AI yet, but if it's a third brain, if it's in as your pair programming and you've got all this other context coming, it's very valuable. I think the idea of leadership spots where you're using it as a bringer of context, like just this concept of context and consequences goes into that conversation. But I want to back up the story just a little bit back to the point of When I look at my organization, and I'm going to use the definition of business capability as something that produces or transforms something in your organization, allows you to operate towards your strategy. When I know which intent or purpose I need to accomplish that's most strategically important, and I can find out what capabilities my organization has to have to deliver that intent or purpose, I can start to have a really meaningful conversation about what's possible with these 5 different types of artificial intelligence that I can bring to bear, or the problem-solving methods. Which one of those solutions will help me close a strategic opportunity? So the grid I'm looking at is strategic opportunity, AI opportunity, and then I'm looking at what's the risk of making it work and being able to run it well. So my third lens is this is going to be really hard to do because your company doesn't have the hygiene or the access to the data it would need to supplement that decision and make it be a good decision. I know John's got a whole model for some of the analysis on this. But if I'm an executive, I don't want to be having a granular discussion about all the nuances of the data and the technologies and all these different things. I want to go, this would benefit from getting more context and consequences clear to the decision maker at the point they're making the decision. The information we would need to have to make that happen would be this information. Getting better at that capability advances me in the marketplace. And now I can start to have a point of view on where I want to invest. There's an outside-in view of building an AI strategy that's very different than looking at every possible thing you could do with emerging technology. I think is important. I don't want to chase my competitors. I want to have a point of view of who I want to be in the marketplace to be able to win and compete. How am I going to win? What market am I in? If I can make that decision, I can go find what are my gaps for being there and how might investment in these emerging technologies help me close those gaps rapidly. If I'm trying to be everything to everybody all the time or leverage every new thing that AI brings, it's going to be impossible. If I don't look at the potential for an AI investment to fail, it's going to require major job redesign. Managers don't run that way. My vendors won't interface with it well. I can't get access to the data. There's a million reasons why that AI implementation is a bad idea. And now you could put together a roadmap to go start creating the conditions to implement these things well. But these are the conversations we have. Well, are we prepared and set up to go solve for that problem? Is that strategically important? Does it actually improve the performance of that capability in a way that it advances me towards my strategy? Like those are interesting conversations to be having. And I don't think most organizations are set up to have those conversations.
If we think back to AI in the 80s and 90s, a lot of the concerns were data scientist concerns. They were engineer concerns. They were the underpinning concerns. And though executives would say, I'm going to invest budget to build out this capability or this core competency, it wasn't as accessible. There were multiple layers of translation from what we're actually doing to getting to that executive concern. Now, when we think of the generative AI, the executive concerns are front and center, and they generally come down to efficiency, ROI, time to market, those sorts of things, improving customer experience, that sort of stuff. As that's become more accessible, it introduces some of the other things, the trust issues, the bias issues, the increased risk profile in those areas. How are you seeing leaders approach that and make the smart decisions? Because you mentioned Internet of Things. There are fridges that have full-blown TVs. You can watch Netflix on your fridge because it's got the internet, and somebody thought it's a great idea. There are toasters that literally run Linux, even though it's an old meme. Are we going to see that with AI? Is it leadership finding a problem to put AI into versus it being the great enabler we hope it to be?
What I was leaning toward is creating a method and a view, a way of making sense out of the opportunities that allows you to focus on the things that will be most valuable to creating sustainable competitive advantage. And in fact, I think that ability to be able to analyze the market and your customer and find those places to invest itself becomes an anchor for a sustainable competitive advantage. The ability to very smartly focus on 7 things instead of 300,000 and make them get implemented really, really well, thoroughly to produce the value is probably more important than running 1 million experiments and hoping that some of them pop in the marketplace. I don't think that we understand all of the consequences of implementing these technologies either. We're not thinking about the big picture. You and I were talking about there's sort of the use case end to end. I've got 14 factors in my model to consider for making an organizational change. You can look at it and discount some of it really, really quickly but you have to be thinking about the big picture of the implementation as you're rolling it out there. And I don't think we have the frames and methods out there. The sense making and systems thinking aspects around this are really important.
Is this just new tech, same old problem? People talk about it as if it's the Industrial Revolution, it's the internet, it is that big to humanity. And I've got my own opinions, but is it that big? Is it something leaders have to think about in terms of its world shaping? Or is it really just another fad technology passing through the org?
I think it's a tipping point technology, John, with the generative AI aspects to it. I think the ubiquity of it and the speed of it and the apparent ease of getting to value from it. I think customer sentiment is going to require it. It's going to have as disruptive of a wave through our organization as the Industrial Revolution, where we went from farming society to a manufacturing society. It's going to be that disruptive, and it's going to have some of the same results. We're going to be way more productive, have a lot more value being produced. It's not going to put everybody out on the street. That move, I think, is I can't manage the social aspects of the entire move as a business person right now. What I need to be doing is figuring out how to make my business sustainable and competitive, how to prepare my workforce for the fact that every job in the world will be redefined in the next 24 months. I don't know if it's that dramatic, but it's going to be pretty significant. So how do we begin to build the muscles to respond and adapt to rapid change to stay competitive and manage those things? Well, I think that for me, if I'm getting away from the science of it, the history of it, the training of it, all that stuff matters. I'm trying to figure out how to be ready for the change that's coming at me. Every job, more information, people that figure out how to focus it and invest it in the right places and sustainably respond to the opportunities that arise. That's the secret sauce.
I love that you said the word history, and you said, you're not as worried about the history of it. I think of that as like small h history of the AI, but I think big H history is really interesting. John tapped into the disruptive potential of the Industrial Revolution and the internet to ask if we're analogical here. And I agree with you. I think it's that same level of shift, which makes me want to look at the and then what happens patterns. In the Industrial Revolution, and we brought manufacturing into centralized locations, it had an effect on supply chains and distribution. And so you started to get sort of village economies and communities and urbanization as consequences, because the Industrial Revolution enabled patterns of work that were different from I grow my own flax, I weave my own thread, I sew my own clothes, instead to the assembly line and tapping into things like that. As much as Ford likes to take credit for inventing the assembly line, really he learned it from a meat production industry and said, oh, we can use that pattern over here. So the Industrial Revolution created a set of, it juggled the calculus of figuring out what was a good way to approach things. And then when we got to the internet, we had the same sort of thing and different versions of it. One of them was looking at the scarcity economy and the different math of supply and demand and value. But another one, look at the newspaper industry, for example. Newspapers competed in discrete geographies, and you could have 2 or 3 newspapers in every given town, and they all purchased national news feeds from the Associated Press and like these centralized sources, and then they competed in the local space. But it was a limited competitive pool. And with the internet, all of a sudden that distribution pattern changed. And so every newspaper was competing with every other newspaper everywhere. And so it was very disruptive to that industry. There were lots of new businesses created and lots of old businesses that didn't shift and didn't embrace, and some that evolved. When I think about AI and getting into the generative or the collaborative, the helping me think, what are the things that shift as a consequence of that? And I have no idea what they are, but I think a leader needs to be on a different footing, understand the ecosystem, and devise tactics for competition based on what you anticipate happening at the different layers is, I don't know, operationally how I think I might approach it in support of a leader. But I think formulating, anticipating, and then asking those questions is really what needs to be on the leader's plate, and why I'm thrilled, that we're talking with you here.
I've got a quote that goes something like, Leadership is the art of envisioning a future that doesn't exist yet and then creating the conditions to make it happen. I think getting in a room and looking at your organization and your markets and your customers and imagining what might edge be possible 2 years from now in an industry if we applied AI everywhere, like just really brainstorming on what's possible and then picking a couple of those threads of who you want to be, figure out how to create those conditions to make it be possible for you. If you're waiting for someone else to figure it out for you, you're going to get eaten alive.
The introduction of AI and the ease of use, it's changed the conditions for what success even looks like. I think we're at a point, and this is my hypothesis, we have to redefine what business success looks like. There's always the profit, the capital, things like that. But me starting a business 2 years ago on this wave and understanding I can force multiply because I built my business knowing this technology is there. I have less staff and can do more than other organizations that started years before me because we optimized around the technology that's there now. Other businesses now have to retrofit it. The same thing with Industrial Revolution. You have to go rebuild your assembly line, internet. You have to go rebuild how you communicate. It's fundamental shifting changes. How do leaders even become aware of the environment for success they have to create when the environment's changing every single day because AI is changing every single day? It's hard to create that stable, successful environment if you don't know what the landscape is. What do you point leaders to, or how do you get them thinking so they can stay ahead of the curve?
A couple of thoughts went through my head as you were talking through that. Let me answer your last question first, and I'll go back. An organization that's set up to be rapidly adaptable has clear-cut boundaries of responsibilities. Like I use the business architecture to define like which value streams and parts of the organization are likely to be disrupted. Do I need to be able to disrupt? And what does it look like to have well-defined boundaries for my technology, my organization, my investment, and my market? Because this is something I'm going to have to be able to move and change rapidly without disrupting my whole company. You see some of that in the root of the projects to products movement, where organizations are trying to get more aligned organizationally. So that's going to be important. The second thing you've got, so I call that coherence, by the way. The organization is coherently aligned. You might not get 100% of your organization, but probably some subset of your organization is one that you can kind of predict is likely to be disrupted or disruptible. Things that are directly in contact with your customer, things that are value creating inside your organization. The second thing that I'm looking at, I'm calling it informed awareness. And it's a little bit of the sense making. How do we get all the information that's available to me about where the market's going? If you looked at the OODA loop or you looked at any sort of strategy, it's what's my environment look like? The Sun Tzu sort of stuff. What's my environment look like? What's my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are my threats? What are my opportunities? Like deeply understanding that, you've got to be gathering that information. You also need to know how your organization is performing. The secret, I believe, is getting that informed awareness into more and more people's hands and having discourse about possible futures with your organization, because you can't invent it all from the top, off the top of your head. And I don't think you should be hiring external consultants to go write huge static documents to make that statement either. Again, I think this sort of state of being able to envision futures and opportunities and be able to get that feedback and then actually be able to go down and implement the change is critically important. So my third one is sort of that the rhythm or cadence of operating and strategically aligning. Cotter talks about having two operating models running your organization at the same time, one that runs the business and one that changes the business. Not very many people have a good changes the business model, and they depend on external resources to go do that. Those have to become good internal capabilities. The last one is just the idea of, I'm calling it strategic empowerment, but how to begin to lead with intent, and how does our organization get good at being able to operate from intent, knowing that it could be different a month from now, and next month and next month. We learned in Agile how to do some of that strategic delegation when it was done well. We also had relatively well-formed teams. So we've learned some of that from our experience in the last 15 years of transforming large corporations to build software. The impact, though, is not just going to be the software side, it's going to be throughout the business. So we need to learn the lessons from those things that we were able to rapidly adapt as demand changed and apply more of those patterns more broadly across the business.
You mentioned a couple things. One was the project to product movement. The other was the agile movement and the dual operating model and things like that. And then the third that really ties into it is external consultants coming in and providing a bunch of static documentation. Those are three very big industry pushes that, in my experience, more often than not ended in failure because they were approached as an isolated thing. You can't say project to product is our thing we're going to do in our business. You have to reorg, redesign, you have to do the whole fundamental changes to your business necessary to make a product model work. You can't just say we're now a PDO and have that be successful. You can't say we're building an agile center of excellence and now we're agile and have that be successful. It's a whole different way of working. You're retooling your entire shop floor. When I think of those level of changes and all the consultants that brought their static documents or playbooks or ways of working and implemented the things they were going to do, I have a big concern we're going to see that with AI. We're already starting to see it. We're seeing the firms come out and say, this is the new way, follow my AI framework. This is the documentation you need. But they're not approaching it as a systemic, fundamental, foundational change to their business. And I'm trying to understand myself, are we seeing a little bit of a cash grab? And I think we are. Anytime there's new tech, there's going to be the cash grabbers. But is it because business needs an answer and they're not thinking deeply about what it means? Or is it really a continuation of the continuous transformation cycle that consulting has got them used to over the past few decades? Are we really just propagating more continuous transformation instead of continuous improvement?
I'd say continuous innovation maybe is the term that I've been leaning into, adaptability and continuous innovation. How do I create the conditions to be able to respond to the market? If you can do that with external consultants, fine, go do it. I think you're going to be hard pressed to go do that. If you're going to hire consultants because they can do some research and pull some things together, go hire 3 people that can actually use ChatGPT really well to do some research and go validate it. I don't think we need armies of external experts laying this stuff out. I believe, and it may not be today, may not be tomorrow, it will happen at different times in different organizations, building the ability to create the conditions to rapidly sense and adapt becomes important across the board because we have no idea what's going to come out. But here's what I know. They're talking 50-time improvements in productivity of new software being developed. It used to be cost prohibitive maybe to throw out an antiquated set of technologies that weren't working for you because just changing them was so slow and so hard, so you had to live with them. So we tried to wrap them. I did a bunch of this. We wrapped them with services to expose them independently and then started breaking out the pieces that would allow you to integrate and operate differently. What has to be true in your organization to go make that happen today? If your technology doesn't support it, as the pace of change accelerates, do you want to depend on external groups to do that? Or do you want to get really, really good at the art of continuous innovation?
You guys said projects to products 3 times, which is like summoning me into the room. Of all the different things in that space, one of the things I really lean into very hard is that the plan is not the goal. The goal is the goal. And when you think about what Dennis is calling about the accelerating pace of change of what becomes possible, both for you and your competitors, what that means is the plan has to change more often. And as you said, you have to change the way your organization executes in order to be able to survive changes to the plan and have those be positive effects and not negative effects. This delegation of intent and purpose is, right, it's the best model I know for being able to get as far down as you can before someone says, here is the plan, and I'm executing it. And let everybody hold on to, this is the goal I'm pursuing, and I happen to have a plan. And I might change the plan tomorrow because I'm now more capable at doing something, or the competitor has evolved in a way that we didn't expect or at a pace we didn't expect. And so we need to change our approach, our solutioning, and our plan to drive towards the goal. And the goal's not we need to launch a new system, but rather we need to engage a new market, right? The way you talk about goals can't be wordsmithing your plan. My goal is to execute the plan I want to execute. That won't work.
What I think we're seeing more of in the really, really big companies is sort of decomposing the company down to smaller, more focused problem spaces to create some adaptability. And that's probably a smart move in those big companies, particularly for those pieces they need to operate differently. And I don't think it happens right all the time. I think you see variation where there's no value for it, region to region or product to product, rather than having a point of view on who you're going to be and going to prove it and building that. I think we've seen that with some of our customers. A lot of times it happens with a bunch of acquisitions where they don't really form a point of view. I think it's important for you to have a point of view on who you're going to be on the market.
One of the big revolutions we see coming speaks to that adaptability sort of conversation. Historically, you had very large IT orgs to support very large business units. Those units, whether they had multiple verticals across different regions or whatever, it was these big battleships that could not turn. As we get further and further with the technology, and you can have smaller, more nimble pieces of your business operating independently within your business, you're going to start to see more of a federated sort of operations. It's no longer all 5 verticals across all 5 regions now rely on a central IT organization. It becomes more, we're all enabled by these advanced capabilities, generative AI, the data lake stuff we can do now, the automatic consumption, the mapping of applications, all the things that behind the scenes we can do. Plus, you can talk to it almost like you can a human. That allows you to build really modular, really adaptive, really big companies that operate like smaller ones. Some of the more forward-leaning companies out there are already approaching this. They're having the conversations about kind of a spoken hub model for business. It's a complete way of thinking about how we structure business differently to focus on that resilient layer, the strategy, the stuff we need to span, but then the adaptable layer, all the different independent pieces that can move independently. Are you, when you're talking to leaders, and this is for either one of you guys, as you're having conversations out there right now, are you hearing we have to fundamentally change how business works because in 2, 3, 5 years, it's going to be a different landscape and we're not competitive if we stay traditionally organized? Because it is very obvious the ability to be adaptable, to redefine what business agility looks like. It's current. It's a today thing. If you wait 2 years to have your plan for that, you're already behind. What are those conversations you're having, and what are the ones you're trying to drive? Where do you want leaders' headspace in? Is it just stay the course and keep doing business as usual? Is it's fundamentally different, or somewhere in between?
Concepts of a composable enterprise or a test-driven enterprise where you've got the hub and spoke and you've got central intent and remote execution, the ability to swap pieces out, doesn't exist in most places today. It's hard to do. There's pragmatic obstacles to it. I think that this technology that's coming out makes that a little bit easier to do in some regards, makes it more possible. The conversation I'm having, people go, that sounds interesting, that sounds exciting, but it's really not practical for me. Right now, we're under financial pressure and we're just back to fundamentals. We're back to executing our fundamentals. There's got to be some sort of a space or a way to have a conversation that says, this is what fundamentals looks like today. This is the basis of execution, at least for some parts of your organization. And there can be some very stable, very static parts of your organization that can run the way they've always run. But even those are going to be massively disrupted. The way you do accounting, expense reports is going to change. The way that you do payroll and hours is going to change. The way that you do governance and reconciling of documents for legal purposes and contracts, like all these things are going to change because of our ability to process mass amounts of unstructured data. So stuff that's historically been pretty stable at the core is going to dramatically change as well. And they go, it's not here today. I'm not getting too far to the curve. People are talking about it, but then you hear, oh, the AI thing's overblown. It's going to slow things down. I'm going to wait. This isn't really happening. So I don't see a lot of action across the board on it. I would desire for organizations to understand how to be continually analyzing those spaces and continually looking for opportunities and get really good at responding when the time is right. Because you can build that muscle now, and then when the opportunity is really necessary, you can go make those moves. I see more idleness in practice or the implementation of AI in a sector, customer service, sales support, in some cases accounting, in some cases marketing. So you're seeing it implemented in some slices, but not fundamentally changing most jobs yet the way that I believe it will in the near future.
And I've heard this over and over. I have to spend my AI budget. They gave me budget. I have to use it for research or a pilot. So there's budget applied to it, but it really is to those weird one-off things. There are good orgs out there that have a really clear roadmap and strategy for where they're going. And the good ones to me aren't, here's the AI thing I'll have in 2 years. The good ones to me are, here's the strategy I'm going to implement to ensure my business understands the current state and how we can use it and how we can more broadly adopt it. It's getting that continuous innovation thing you were talking about going, build the engine to where we can innovate versus go build a bot right now. Because in a lot of places we see that tried, it fails because the tech's not there yet. But being able to go with the changing technology as it really, really rapidly advances is the most important thing. If a business isn't looking ahead and doing what it can to be adaptable and see what it can do to maybe decouple some of its systems, all the stuff we've talked about for 20 years, continue looking at how to keep that adaptability, that agility at your lower levels so that when you hit the ground, you can move where you need to. And the tech is constantly evolving. It hasn't stayed stable for a month.
This isn't like a brand new thing. It's a tipping point on top of 20 years of progress. But we're at that tipping point.
An overnight success, a decade in the making. John, to answer your question, I am almost exclusively seeing organizations focusing on just keeping their heads above water, dealing with the nearer term realities in different markets. I have been talking with one company who is trying to understand what it means to be a good organization in the future. What are the dimensions they need to look at, the problems they need to solve for? They want to understand how to approach the problem, which I think is a really healthy step as opposed to looking for an answer in a 70-page slide deck.
I like to try to leave on a positive note every time. Dennis, in a brighter future with AI, the things that we're now enabled to do, the capabilities that are being unlocked, and the things that leaders have at their disposal, what's the good side of all this? So not just the problems that they've got to face, but what's immediately positive for them as leaders of these sometimes really big places?
For me, one thing is I can elevate the competence of my workforce dramatically by augmenting them with informed insights of the consequences, the opportunities, the context, giving more information to people, teaching them how to leverage the tool to think. I can create a tremendous amount more productivity and I think job satisfaction for people in my organization. I think a lot of the jobs that AI will eat are jobs that are not wonderfully fun to do anyway. By the same vein, they're going to increase the productivity of people that might be doing those jobs today. So I think that's an interesting opportunity. As an executive, the ability to have far more insight into the connective tissue and the sense making that comes from the connectivity of data and the information that's available, it's going to be powerful. There's some challenges with it. There's some ethical issues with it, but the ability to deeply understand stuff is going to be powerful. One of the most destructive things that we see in organizations is when we put 10 times more work into teams. The overburdening of people that are doing work is just rampant in every organization that we go into. I think if we could just start to get insights into the consequences of overburdening and the value of trying to move towards more flow-based solutions, like teaching how to see that, will be super, super powerful and super productive. I think there's a big productivity boost coming in organizations.
What do you say to leaders that are struggling with fear or apprehension about the use of AI? How do they move past those fears and kind of embrace the change that's here?
Fears are real. You could lose your job. You could lose your department. You could deploy something that creates an ethical problem. I don't know that worrying about them and not doing anything improves your standing in the world. How do you deal with it? By having very pragmatic tools. This is where we're going as an organization. This is where we're going to compete. This is why it's necessary. This is the type of change we're going to make. This is the governance that's necessary to make that type of change. By making it be really concrete and what we have to do, we can create safety for a lot of the people moving that direction. I would start building myself for the future and become a leader in the space.
Dennis, it has been fantastic. Where can people reach you or find out more about how you're thinking about these things? What's the best place for them to get a hold of you?
My email is dennis@orgright.com. You can hit me up on the Agile Network. You can go to my website, www.orgright.com.
As always, Dennis, it is a pleasure to have these conversations.
Thanks for joining us today. None of this conversation is finished from my point of view. We need to keep going.
It goes forever, my friend.
I'm Scott Sehlhorst, and that's John Tanner, and this has been The Problem with AI. Find us at theproblemwithai.com or connect with us on LinkedIn. Now it's time for the stylings of Ada Lovelace.
Binary brain wears suits and tie, stealing jobs, now humans cry. Silicon mind boss can't deny, heartless decisions, profits high. Crunching numbers, stocks rise up, no coffee breaks, no need for a cup. Cold calculations can't interrupt. Where's the soul? System corrupt. And that's the problem with AI. Cold metal hard, human dreams fly. And that's the problem with AI. Bottom line thrives, empathy die. Automate tasks, humans dismissed. Synthetic thoughts, emotions missed. Corporate gains, getting rich lists, but what if the soul can't coexist? Factory floor, no chatter loud. Metallic workforce, business proud. Silent tears beneath the cloud. Life replaced, decisions vowed. And that's the problem with AI. Cold metal hard, human dreams fly. And that's the problem with AI. Bottom line thrives, empathy die. Empathy die. Empathy die. Problem with AI. Cold metal hard, human dreams fly. And that's the problem with AI. Bottom line thrives, empathy die.